Welcome to O&P, Profit is Not Optional. In restoration contracting, there's a dangerous misconception that profit is a luxury, something you add only on certain jobs, or if the insurer allows it. Today we're here to dispel that notion. Profit is never optional. It's an essential part of your cost structure and survival as a business. We'll tackle the infamous 10 and 10 markup myth, the idea that 10% for overhead and 10% for profit is some kind of industry standard. We'll refute that with facts and show why clinging to 10 and 10 is outdated and harmful to your business. By the end, you'll have clarity on different types of overhead, understand where the 10 and 10 model came from, and learn how to confidently argue for O&P on every job, from a one-room water mitigation to a full rebuild. Let's get started. Let's address some common misconceptions about markup. First, the 10 and 10 trap. Many adjusters claim a restoration industry standard of 10% for overhead and 10% for profit. The truth, no such industry-wide standard exists. That so-called standard was never codified by any authority. It's a myth propagated by insurance companies and third-party administrators to keep payouts low. Overhead needs vary widely between companies and projects, so a flat 10% doesn't magically fit all. In fact, few restoration firms can even break even at 10 and 10 markup. Many would lose money if they tried to operate on those thin margins. Also, let's clear up markup versus margin. A 20% markup is not a 20% profit margin in your pocket. Remember, margin is what's left after costs. If you mark up a job by 20%, your gross profit margin is around 16.7%. And from that, you still must cover overhead costs. That's why 10 and 10, which is a 20% markup, often results in a razor-thin margin once you account for all expenses. Misconception. Profit markup is extra fluff. Here's the reality. Profit markup is how you cover operating costs and generate net profit to sustain your business. Finally, some contractors feel pressure to omit O&P if an adjuster refuses it. This is dangerous. If you price a job with zero profit just to get the job, or appease an insurer, you are effectively paying for the privilege of working, a quick road to bankruptcy. As industry experts have observed, most successful restoration contractors target gross profit margins of 40% or more, not 20%. Even a renowned industry author noted that a contractor who only charges 10 and 10 could end up with a net loss on the project. In short, profit is not gravy, it's the meat. It's non-negotiable. Why is the 10% overhead myth so dangerous? Because it grossly underestimates the true cost of doing business. Overhead isn't abstract. It's everything from your office rent and utilities to salaries of your support staff, training, insurance, vehicles, equipment, marketing, all the costs that keep your doors open even when you're not on a specific job. For many restoration contractors, these expenses total much more than 10% of their revenue. Let's look at an example from industry analysis. A mid-sized restoration company doing $5 million in revenue tallied up its overhead for the year. This includes management and office salaries, payroll taxes, liability insurance, vehicles and fuel, office rent, marketing, unbillable labor time, bad debts, the works. The total overhead came out to around $2.1 million for that year, roughly 42% of their $5 million in sales. Yet if they followed the 10 and 10 formula, the insurance would only allocate $500,000 for overhead, 10% of $5 million. That's a $1.6 million shortfall. Clearly, 10% wouldn't even come close to covering the real operating costs of that business. The author noted that this one-size-fits-all 10% overhead is outdated and unrealistic. What might barely work for one company will sink another. This imbalance is one of the key reasons many restoration companies struggle or fail. If you're only recouping half or less of your true overhead, you're robbing your company of sustainability. You can't grow, you can't invest in quality staff or equipment, and you can't weather slow periods. The lesson? Know your numbers. Calculate your actual overhead percentage and ensure that your markup, the O&P you apply, is sufficient to cover it, plus give you a reasonable profit. 10 and 10 might be easy math, but it's bad math for your business health. Let's debunk the origins of the 10 and 10 myth. How do we end up with these particular numbers? Truth is, no one knows for sure who first said 10% overhead and 10% profit. It's been around for decades as a simplistic guideline. It likely started as a convenient estimate or average in the distant past. Over time, insurance companies latched onto it as a cost control measure, treating it as a de facto maximum. My buddy Clark in the Restoration Advisors team describes 10 and 10 as an old benchmark that insurers and TPAs love to propagate to keep their costs down. In other words, it benefits the payer, not the contractor. Consider this. Before roughly 2010, some carriers were actually more flexible. For instance, Allstate and others sometimes approved overhead and profit of 15%, even up to 19% each for overhead and profit on certain jobs. They recognized that complex projects or certain markets justified higher markups. But as belt tightening set in, the industry largely regressed to the simplistic 10 and 10 across the board. This shows 10% wasn't a magic number handed down from above. It was just an easily abused cap. Now it's hardened into a myth that 10 and 10 is all you're ever going to get. Another related myth is the 3-trade rule. This is the notion that overhead and profit is only owed when 3 or more different trades are involved in a job, basically when a general contractor is needed to coordinate. Adjusters have used this rule of thumb for years to deny O&P on simpler jobs. But let's be clear. The 3 trades criterion is not grounded in any statute or standard insurance policy term. It's just a convention that some companies used internally. In fact, a claims manager testified in 2022 that the rule at his company was O&P for 3+ trades. He even admitted it's an imperfect approach. Many carriers have since publicly moved away from explicitly counting trades. Now they talk about complexity or whether a high level of coordination is required before they'll pay O&P. That sounds more reasonable, but in practice, it's still subjective and used to deny O&P. Oh, we don't think this job was complex enough. Here's a key takeaway. 10 and 10 and the 3 trades rule are artifacts of adjuster lore, not law. They persist because they're convenient for insurers. As one industry advocate put it, carriers love to say we don't pay that because it's an easy 20% savings that the contractor gives in. But our job is to know better, present the facts, and push back against these outdated ideas with hard data and documentation. One of the most common and harmful myths is that overhead and profit should only be added on big jobs or when multiple trades are involved. Contractors often hear things like O&P isn't allowed on mitigation-only jobs, or if it's just one trade, no general contractor, that means no O&P. Let me state this unequivocally. There is nothing in standard insurance policies, state laws, or Xactimate guidelines that says O&P magically disappears on single trade projects. This is a false narrative. It came from the old 3 trades rule of thumb, but as we discussed, that's not a legal rule. It was an internal insurance practice. If you're a contractor performing work, whether it's tearing out drywall in mitigation or replacing a kitchen sink, you have overhead costs for that job, and you are entitled to a reasonable profit for your service. The scope of work might be smaller, but you still have to mobilize your team. For example, mitigation-only water damage might involve just water extraction and setting drying equipment. One trade, water techs. But consider the overhead. Someone had to take the call at 2 a.m., dispatch the crew, maintain and depreciate those dehumidifiers and fans, document the drying process, maybe apply antimicrobial, haul away debris, etc. There's coordination and supervision going on, certainly enough to merit overhead and profit as part of the invoice. The notion that emergency service work somehow doesn't involve the contractor's overhead or management is absurd. In fact, many mitigation projects are complex in their own right. Hazardous conditions, rapid response, technical monitoring. Similarly, even a single trade rebuild job, say just a roofing replacement, still involves project management. The roofer, whether a sub or you as a GC, has to schedule the crews, ensure safety compliance, handle materials ordering, and so forth. Those activities are traditionally part of what a general contractor would do. If you, as a GC, hire a roofer, that roofer's bid includes their overhead and profit, and you as a GC still have your own overhead in managing that contract. If you self-perform, you're wearing the GC hat yourself. Either way, the job doesn't execute itself for free. The Restoration Industry Association and experienced estimators are adamant on this point. O&P is not contingent on a particular number of trades. It's contingent on whether a contractor is reasonably required to complete the work. And more often than not, even a single trade constitutes needing a contractor's involvement. As one consultant quipped, the property damage repair industry is like the Wild West. There are no laws limiting what markup you can charge, and insurers say we don't pay that simply because they hope you don't know better and will back down. But success stories abound. Estimators across the country routinely apply 10 and 10 to one-trade jobs and get paid. The secret is they stand firm and educate the adjuster or insured as needed. So the next time someone says mitigation doesn't get O&P or one trade equals no overhead, you push back. Ask them politely, can you show me where in the policy it excludes contractor overhead and profit for this job? Because Xactimate's publisher actually says O&P applies as appropriate to any estimate. They won't find a policy exclusion because there isn't one. The cost to fully repair a loss includes reasonable contractor overhead and profit whenever a contractor is used, whether one trade or 10. If they insist on the old no GC needed line, you can respond that the complexity and coordination of the job does require professional management. Ultimately, you have a contract with the property owner, not the insurer. If your client needs the work done and you incur overhead to do it, that's part of the claim. Don't shortchange yourself.